All right, welcome to another video, another live sessions, another week of quarantine as well. Yeah, who knows how long this is going to go on for, but yeah, let's dive in. Today I'm gonna just go through some session structure things, looking at some multi-channel presets, looking at some of the functions of rearranging a session, building a new one, and some things that have helped me, particularly when adapting older sessions to newer ones. So I've got let's say I've got a file that I really like, but I need to make some edits to it, whether it's a different input list, but I want to keep some of the settings. I'll look at some of that as well. So yeah, hopefully some of this information is useful to you. I'm sure that some of you as well will already know how to do all this, but yeah, just another refresher, I suppose, at this point. So let me transition over to looking at the console. So I've got my SD11 here with my Stream Deck set up as well. I've currently got the same file loaded as I did last week, so it's the gflip show file. And so, yep, a bunch of channels, bunch of stuff happening. I've basically, I suppose the scenario is I've been using this show file for quite a while. I'm really happy with how it's going. Everything's good with an end of tour, and before the next tour, we're going to go into production rehearsal for a few days. We're going to rebuild some things, but maybe there's some settings from this file that I want to carry across to another file, or I want to use the same file, but maybe we're just adding, a channel in the patch or something like that. So that's kind of the avenue that I'm going to try and work from. So the first section of the console I wanted to just have a quick look at is the session structure window. So if you go File and you go Session Structure, this basically brings up, and I can see, hang on one second, I'm just going to reconnect to this device. There we go. Okay, cool. So now we can see, there we go. All right, now we're cooking. All right, so file, session structure in there, so we can see that this is how we choose how many buses we want. Basically structuring our file so that we're ready to build it and start creating some mixes. Now there's some really cool features in this section that really help in some of these sorts of situations. So you'll notice there's a bunch of buttons, and if I hit default all, this is basically going to take the console back to a completely default session. Now, sometimes this is good. Sometimes we want to default so we can rebuild a file. Sometimes I just want to default certain actions or certain parts of the console to rebuild so that I don't lose everything. And so you can essentially go around and unselect different bits that you don't want to default, essentially. So maybe I want to keep the way my matrix inputs and outputs work. I want to keep my groups. I want to keep where my auxes are. I want to keep my rack settings. I want to, maybe I just want to clear snapshots. In that case, I would unselect everything, just clear snapshots. So there are some things you can do from here with defaulting that are really cool, a different combination of stuff. Maybe I want to keep all of my channel settings, but I just want to rebuild all my banks back to normal, so I can reassign things without getting caught up with where things are. So I can literally just hit rebuild banks vertically. And when I hit restructure, it won't do anything else except for rebuild the banks. So that's a super helpful little bit. And the next bit I want to show you is this aux and group order. So this is a cool thing when you're adding auxes to a session. So if you just go here and you add more auxes, it'll just dump them to the end of the list. Now, if you're OCD like me, I hate that. I like having, particularly in a scenario like this where I'm doing front of house and monitors, I like to have all of my monitor mixes for the first set of auxes, and then I want to have my effects as the last ones. So the way I do that is if I head into aux order, I can add sends in here, but in a certain list, so that when they appear on my channel strip, I'll see them in the order that I want them. So I can add another mono and another mono, and then I can move these up or down. So let's say that I want to have, that aux as my number one, and then that one up there, and then that one there. I want to rearrange all my stuff. I can do that from this menu. I can do the same with my groups. Again, I'm OCD, so I really enjoy having my master group as always my last group. And the reason I like having all of this in order is so that when I go to ripple patch, which I'll show you in a little bit, it all ripples in the right direction and across the board. If I've got things out of whack, even if I've got them on my surface in the right order, if I don't have them in the order of programming on the console, when I ripple things, it's going to ripple them in the order that I've got here. So, I generally arrange all of my groups so that they're in the order that I originally would, as I would want to patch them, essentially. So I do all that from here. So I'm just going to cancel out and reload this session. So I'm going back to normal for a little bit. So we'll pull this back up. Now, a cool one is, let's say that I have, so like with this file, I've got a bunch of macros set up, and I want to keep my macros and perhaps save a session that has a bunch of macros ready to go. Stream Deck's just catching up there. So, so let's say that I have a bunch of macros that I want to keep, but I want to wipe everything else on my session. Session structure is a good place to do that because I can go here, I can default all, and then if I can unselect clear macros, I can then restructure my board. All I want to do is clear everything else but keep my macros. I can hit restructure. It's going to restructure the board. Now, there is a little bit of housekeeping to do when you do this as well. So it's not perfect, but for me, it's a starting point at least, rather than having to rebuild everything. So you'll notice that on my Stream Deck, all of my macros have reappeared. But if I go to my channels, I have a completely and utterly blank file with nothing assigned. Everything's gone back to normal. But all of my macros are still there. Now, here is the trick. Things that are session dependent or channel dependent, they're obviously not going to be programmed. Now, things like these where I've got my aux panel, view effects, my save button, all that kind of thing is going to stay there because no matter what session I've got loaded, all of those functions are all readily available in the console. Now, things like this that I have assigned to a particular channel, all of those functions are going to disappear. So if I go into here, editor, and I go talk to stage, this one, you'll notice that it is empty. So it's obviously cleared that because as it's defaulted the settings of the channels, it has cleared that. But this is still really useful because particularly when it comes to assigning the layout to the Stream Deck, assigning colors, assigning all that sort of stuff, all that's already done for you. So essentially all you need to go in and do input channel, whatever it was that you wanted, or you can just capture it, hit capture, go to your new input channel and go, yep, I want to turn that aux on, get rid of capture, delete all the crap that you don't want, and essentially I've now got that macro turning that. If I do that, I've now got that macro hopefully turning that aux on. So yeah, that's one way. If you were using a file that you really liked your layout of macros, or there are things you wanted to keep. Obviously these Reaper controls up here, so play, stop, record, all that stuff is still applicable because our external control is still set up with the right commands in it. If you don't know how to do that external control stuff, Fraser from Monica Audio did a really cool video on his Facebook Live last week about connecting Reaper through OSC on Digico. So that's a cool little video to check out too if you want to start controlling Reaper from your macros. So yeah, all the macros that are non-session or non-channel dependent will all stay But obviously things that are assigned to particular snapshots or channels, the layout of your macros will stay there. Things like virtual sound check, like that's still going to work because that doesn't change on the console when you load a new session. So yeah, that's a cool way to keep your macros when you want to rebuild a session. And then a lot of people would save a session like this as a default and carry that on a stick. So whenever they go to a new console and they want to load, but they want to have all their macros there, they literally just load this session and then build around. So from this point, you can go back into session structure and you can decide, okay, I want another couple of stereo auxes, I want another couple of mono groups. I want to make sure that my master is the last one, and rebuild and restructure. And your macros will stay there. You'll add your auxes, you'll add your groups, and you can start building your file from there. So that's a handy little trick. I'm going to load my original session again to go through some other stuff. Now the next little bit is a cool little trick with multi presets. So presets are really, 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 really handy, and I use them quite a bit, particularly when it comes to taking a show file from being connected to something like a D-rack, and then I'm going to connect it to an SD rack. You can actually save a multi-channel preset of all of your head amps, go to your new rack, recall, and it will convert relative from D-rack to SD rack. So obviously the D-rack has a pad, so everything converts relative to what the SD rack gain structure is like, which is really handy. I often find I have to make a couple of little adjustments, but for the most part, it's pretty good. So the next little bit, I want to chat a little bit about multi-channel presets. And I suppose one of the uses for this, for me, was, let's say I've got this lovely session happening. I'm really happy with the way it's sounding, but and this is actually something that I did recently, is that I want to add a ride cymbal channel. Now, yes, you can add it all the way to the end of your channel list like I did. You can stick it all the way down here, ride cymbal number 43, although it's coming in 9, so it follows the patch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Ride is 9, and then the rest follows on from that. But again, if I want to do things like ripple patch or ripple EQ or any of that kind of thing, having it down there is a little bit annoying because I can ripple 8 channels of my drums, but then I can't ripple onto 9 or something like that. And particularly with patching as well. So again, if I go to another rack or I've got a patch from another port, I've just got to remember that I have another channel that isn't in line with the rest of them. Now, good way to take care of this is with multi-channel presets, and I'll show you how. Now, with a lot of this stuff, I prefer to use the channel list here because it gives me everything in its order, and it doesn't account for any channel assignments that I've got on my layer. So, if I start cross assigning different channels on my layer, that kind of messes with my head a little bit. So I prefer to do most of this stuff from this channel list menu, and if you don't know where that is, it's just layout, channel list. Brings up everything that's on your board, inputs, auxes, groups, matrix, control groups. When you create multis, it sticks it in there too, which is really cool. Talkback input and solo. And when you hit this edit button down here at the bottom of the screen, and you go into edit mode, all of these things now become editable. So you'll notice that this is the exact same outputs window as the bottom of a channel. That's the exact same inputs window of the top of the channel, and insert points and all that sort of thing. It's also a good place just to save channels completely. So rather than having to go into your channel, here, and select all those bits there, you can literally just hit one button here and that saves everything on that channel. So that's super handy, particularly when you've got things down the bottom here like the Reaper control channel. Again, watch a video about that. I'm not going to go into that today. Supports, talk to stage, all that stuff that I never, ever, ever, ever want to have automated. I'll always just save that off. Like that. So back to multi-channel presets. So we'll have a look at how we can basically slot the ride cymbal in to the middle of the channels. So the first thing I want to do is I've got 8 channels of drums straight up. If I go onto my input section and go into my presets menu, I'm just going to delete these ones so we don't get confused. This is where we create a preset for that channel. And down the bottom here, you can basically choose what you want the recall scope to be when you recall it. So by default, the preset will save every parameter of the input channel or output channel, depending on what you're doing. But the recall scope, so when you go to recall that preset, you can just recall certain elements of it. So let's just say you just want to recall the EQ preset that you had, but you want to keep the gain and the compression and the dynamics as per whatever you have on your channel. You can do that from here. When I'm saving it, I like to select all of them anyway, just so that I know in my head that that's what I'm doing and I'm saving all of those parameters. So when you hit new, if you want to save a multi-channel preset, right after you hit new, the first thing you have to do is choose the amount of channels, because this is not, you can't edit this, particularly after you save the preset. You can't then say, oh, actually I only want this preset to be 6. You actually got to create a new preset from that point. So if you want to create a multi-channel preset, you have to enter, or at least I just choose to enter the value in straight away so that I know that's how many preset channels I'm gonna recall. So in this case, I want to recall 8 channels because I want to save 8 channels of drums, for instance, right? So I might just say, label this kick through overheads. So I know that channels kick through overheads are in that preset. Maybe I want to call this channel 1 to 8. It doesn't really matter, really. Call it whatever you want, whatever makes sense. So I'm going to go kick through overheads and hit OK. I've now saved a preset 8 channels long. I've saved the input routing, which includes the name as well, gain and trim, input procedure, EQ, dynamics, aux groups, basically the entire channel strip of 8 channels in a row I've saved. So if I go down to here, I've got some blank channels, and I go into here and I go presets and I go input and I select all. And if I hit, so I'm on channel 46, if I hit kick overheads, you'll see I've essentially just pasted my entire set of drums down 8 channels, right? Not what I want to do right now. So I am actually going to then reload my session, which is a good lesson in making sure that you have something saved as well that you can go back to, because things like this you cannot undo. Once they're done, they are done. So let's go back to our layout channel list. Okay, so in this instance, my first 8 channels are going to stay exactly the same, but I want to slot a ride symbol in at channel 9. Okay, so essentially first 8 are going to stay, and I want to grab presets of the next chunk of channels all the way to the end, and I'm going to then paste that preset 1 channel down and then slot my ride in on channel 9. So as we were doing before, I'm just going to count how many channels we need. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. I've got a spare channel in here, so essentially I can do 22 channel preset and then paste, and it will just slot right in there. So I'm going to go to my channel 9 in edit mode. I'm going to go presets. I said 22, I think. So I'm going to select all. I'm going to go new preset, 22 channels. Right. Okay, I can edit the name. I just can't edit the amount of channels. So let's just say TM6 to tech, because I think that's where it ended. I could be wrong, but pretty sure that's where it is. Now, close that window. Let's go into here. Let's go presets, all. I'm going to hit my preset on channel 10. You'll then notice that, boom, there we go. We've just rippled all that preset all the way down. So now my tech talk's still in 31 because we had that spare channel there. Now I can go into channel 9. I can call it ride symbol. I can patch it. Keep in mind the patching will obviously stay, But now that I've got all of my channels in line, I can go to my first one. I know it's a 32 channel patch. Undo, redo. Boom, everything's patched. Now, here's some of the housekeeping that you need to do. Stereo channels, stay there. What you may have to do is go through and go, yep, I want that to be a mono channel. I want that to be a mono channel. You know, that's a stereo. This is a stereo. So you still have to go through and redo stereos and things like that. Which is, you know, it's just a little bit of housekeeping you got to do. And to be honest, I don't mind doing it because that's the way it works. So, right, so let's redo our patching now that we've got all our stereo channels in line. One thing I didn't do is I've only got a 24 channel patch. So I'm just going to ripple 24 channels, and then these are copies, so they are repatches, but that doesn't matter. Let's just do 24 for now. 24 channels. Right, so now I've patched everything, and you'll notice that my ride is right where it needs to be, and everything is essentially bumped over one. Now you might need to reassign some channels if you didn't have things there, but that's a really quick way without having to essentially write a whole lot of stuff and redo everything. You can just use multi-channel presets to stick channels in there, which can be just a quicker way of sorting that out. A little bit of housekeeping that you need to do, but that's fine. Now, if you do decide that you want to reorder your auxes from here, let's say, for example, snare drum, I'm going to put it at Unity in the spare line. You'll notice that if I do go to my session structure and I grab that aux and I go, actually, my spare wants to be at the top, unselect rebuild banks because that's not what I want to do. I want to keep my layout as it is and hit restructure. Once the console has restructured, won't save it for now. You'll notice that that spare or the contributions to that aux have stayed exactly the same. So when you're moving around your auxes in the list, all that information stays there. Don't be worried that you're gonna end up clearing a bunch of stuff. It's fine. It'll just stay there. All that information is there. Now the last little bit that I wanted to show you. And by the way, I'm going through this pretty fast. I'm trying to keep these to half an hour, so that people don't get too bored. So if you do have any questions about any of that, just comment, hit me up on Instagram, Facebook, all that business. I'll try and answer it if I can. So the other section of the board that I wanted to show you is the global set to defaults section. Probably the most dangerous section on the board because it can wipe a whole lot of stuff, but super useful if you're creating a brand new session file, which I'm going to do. So I'm going to go session structure. I'm going to default everything. Once I've hit default, you can then, move, add auxes, do whatever you want to do, and hit restructure. I'm going to go to a brand new session. And I'll show you what global set to defaults is really cool for. And there are some really interesting workflow things too, particularly during festivals, that you can assign these sorts of actions to macros and can really speed things up a little bit. So brand new blank file, nothing there. Now, the tedious task of moving all of your faders up to Unity and trying to, land them on there. No, do it this way. There's a way quicker way. Global set to defaults in our files. And here I can select the type of channel and the action that I want to do. Now, keep in mind, this happens across the board. So it doesn't matter if you've got channels saved or not. It'll just apply to all channel types that you select. The cool thing is, the channels are still subject to snapshots. So if you go back to a snapshot, any information will still be stored in a snapshot. So in this case, I want to put all my aux outputs to Unity. I can do that by hitting aux outputs, faders to 0. Now I can just move my little camera and you'll see that there we go. All my faders are at unity. I can do faders off, faders on, mutes on. So all these sorts of functions that I can do with global set to defaults. Super handy when setting up your board for the first time. I tend to use this to go, aux, groups, matrix, outputs. I want them all at unity, and then I can turn their mutes on, so at least, I'm safe if there's anything coming through. And then that way, I know that when I unmute certain things, that it's going to pass audio. So that's a cool little thing. Let's say I go back to my previous session. I want to keep. Let's load that session again. Gflip file. Let's say that I want to keep my bus structure, my bus names, my aux names, all that sort of stuff, but I essentially just want to clear out my input channels. There's a few ways you can do this. So you can do it from the global set to defaults menu, file, global set to defaults, select input channels. I can turn EQ on and off globally. I can default dynamics. I can default EQ. The other cool way is if you only want to, here we go. For me, for example, at the bottom of my channel, I always have, pink noise, BGM, talk to stage, supports, all that kind of thing. But I want to essentially clear every channel above that. Easiest way to do that is I can select a blank channel, or I can create a blank channel on my board. So I can go to my kick drum channel and I can go presets default. I can default that channel. If I hit input route as well, it should default the name, or maybe not. I think because I've got things patched. But let's say I just want to default the EQ, dynamics, the auxes, all that sort of thing. I can then take this channel and go copy to. I can then say I want to copy to 32 channels, input route, gain, trim, all that sort of stuff, and go like boom, hit the solo button. I've then cleared all of my input channels, but I've left things like talk to stage, pink noise, all that kind of stuff there. But I've essentially defaulted all of the channels. So I think I did 32. So channels 1 to 32 are now defaulted. No groups assigned, no nothing, none of that. If I want to unpatch, I can then unpatch 32 channels like that. And essentially now I can just go through, relabel my channels and rebuild my file. But I've kept my bus structure. I've even kept the EQ and the processing on my buses if that's something that you want to keep. And yeah, things like safes, all that sort of stuff will stay on the channels as well. So yeah, so there's a couple little handy hints when you're rearranging your file from something older that you want to create a new file for. Hit me up with any questions. I know I raced through that, but yeah, just trying to keep these videos nice and short so nobody gets too bored as well. So yeah, hit me up with any questions. Also hit me up with any kinds of content that you want me to go through. I'm literally stuck here with a Digico, and if I don't know it, I will definitely figure it out. I had a very interesting day yesterday trying to get Reaper connected to my new Nook in my front of house rack, which was an absolute mission. So it gave me and a friend something to do for a little while via the internet. So yeah, just hit us up with anything that you want to know. Happy to try and answer as many questions as I can. And if I don't know, I have the time to figure it out. So I'll do that. Hit me up on the socials, MAudioProd, MAUDIOPROD on both Facebook and Instagram. And yeah, I may see you next Monday if I do another one of these. We'll see how it all goes. So yeah, thanks for tuning in again.